delighted as we welcome our guest authors, Deborah Wiles and Andrea Davis Pinkney, to tell us more about their new books, Bobby, A Story of Bobby Kennedy, and Because of You, John Lewis. John Lewis and Bobby Kennedy formed a strong personal and working relationship in the 1960s. Our authors will discuss their books about these two men and their tireless work to bridge the divide between Black and white, rich and poor, liberal and conservative, young and old, in a conversation relevant to the current political, social, and cultural movement. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping notes. Please note that closed captioning is available for today's program. Click the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and select Enable Transcript. You can click the link that we'll drop in the chat to get your own copy of Bobby, A Story of Bobby Kennedy, and Because of You, John Lewis. Lastly, if you have a question for our authors, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, they will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want answered. Now on to the event you've been waiting for. Award-winning author Andrea Davis Pinkney is best known for her biographies about extraordinary African Americans. She's written more than 20 books for children, including the Caldecott Honor Book and Coretta Scott King Honor Book, Duke Ellington, the Coretta Scott King Honor Book and winner of the Carter G. Woodson Award, Let It Shine, Stories of Black Women Freedom Fighters, and Alvin Ailey, which was a parenting publication gold medal winner. Deborah Wiles is the author of several highly acclaimed books, including 2 National Book Award finalists, Each Little Bird That Sings and Revolution. Her first picture book, Freedom Summer, received the Ezra Jack Keats New Writer Award. She's also an NAACP Book Award finalist, E.B. White Award winner, Golden Kite Award winner, Jane Addams Peace Award finalist, and the recipient of a Penn Phyllis Reynolds Naylor Working Writer Award Fellowship. It is my pleasure to turn the event over to Andrea and Deborah.
Thank you. What a great introduction. Thank you for having us. Andrea and I actually have a little bit of our own kind of run of show, and Andrea is going to begin, right? That's what we sort of thought, and start talking about John Lewis, and I'm going to sit and just bask in this lovely presentation because I have this book and it's fantastic.
Well, thank you, Deborah and Susan and everyone. Hello, Politics and Prose, and all of you lovely, good people kind of joining us this evening. And I have to say, just to be in the same Zoom sphere as Deborah Wiles is just a pleasure and an honor and a privilege and all that. So because of you, John Lewis, you know, I was one of the literally millions of people who in the summer of 2020 was hooked in, tuned in, watching CNN as it broadcast the funeral of John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. And all of a sudden, a 10-year-old kid comes to the podium at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, which was the church in Atlanta where Martin Luther King was the pastor. And he starts to deliver his own kind of 10-year-old eulogy to a man that he is referring to as his friend. And I'm watching, and here's this kid, you know, with sweat on the brow. I can't imagine, you know, being 10 and knowing that the world is watching. And there he was, and he's reading the poem Invictus, which I learned that day was a favorite of Congressman John's, poem by William Ernest Henley. And I'm thinking, what led to this moment? Who is this kid? I later found out that he was at that time 10-year-old Tybre Faw from Johnson City, Tennessee. Now, as this was unfolding, my own kind of brow started to sweat with like that excitement that we writers get when we just are very inspired by something. And my editor at Scholastic, Diane Hess, we compared notes later, was having the exact same experience. And Diane reached out to me, you know, probably later that day and said, Andrea, you know, did you see, are you watching? I was like, yes, you know, we're texting. Yes, I saw it. I watched. And she said, this is a book. And that's how it began. And what I learned later was what led to that moment was that Tybre Faw learned in school about Congressman John. He was a kid who had a passion for social justice and civil rights. He then begged his two grandmothers to somehow meet Congressman John Lewis. And so the grandmothers learned that Congressman John was going to be making his annual march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which he does every year. And they loaded up their 10-year-old grandson with, as they tell it, a box of books and a box of snacks. And they drove from Johnson City to Selma, Alabama. And there they were with thousands of people who had the same idea. We want to get a glimpse of Congressman John Lewis. So there's this child, and it's almost like the powers that be, I call it the glittery hand of God, reached down and kind of pointed Tybre out to John Lewis. John Lewis comes out of the back of the church, and you can see all this, by the way, on CNN. You can Google it. John Lewis comes out of the back of the church, makes a beeline through a crowd right to this boy, and they become friends. And that you can see on the cover of Because of You, John Lewis, there's the boy, Tybre, holding the sign. That was the sign he was holding on that day. And a friendship ensued. They became friends. They like real friends, not like a notable, kind of is nice to a kid. They really became friends. And that's what led to that moment where Tybre delivered, his eulogy. To be standing at the podium of Martin Luther King Jr. and to have President Obama there was truly magical. So Tybre says that he believes he was chosen for that moment. And he, up to that moment, and now he's 14 now, is his own kind of civil rights foot soldier. He was always out there before he met John, and is now on the sidewalks and streets speaking up about everything, human rights, violence, poverty, climate issues. And it's just a very compelling story. And I put it in a book because I wanted to inspire young people to do the same.
Wow. And it inspires me to do the same as well. It's amazing. I love there's a line on the flap that says, "Who will be the next to rise up and turn the page on history?" And you and I both have that sort of feeling about those people we write about. And Bobby Kennedy is no different. I was 15 when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. And I really believe that along with the heartache and the loss and the grief that the country felt and I felt, and those of us who were becoming activists felt, I believe that his work, his change, the way that he changed his life after the death of his brother, John Kennedy, was an inspiration to so many people to see that you can be going down one path that's been prescribed for you, basically, and that you can change that path and become something, you can transcend your station and become something bigger than you were. I love the fact that RFK and John Lewis knew one another, that John Lewis inspired Bobby Kennedy in the civil rights movement, that watching him go through what he went through in the early 60s, mid 60s, really helped solidify Bobby Kennedy's idea of service to people, and that life was bigger than the privilege that you might live, and that you had a voice, then you could use it. Just for some background, Bobby Kennedy was the younger brother of John Kennedy and helped his brother become president, had grown up in a family, the Kennedy dynasty, basically, where his father, Joe Kennedy, pushed his kids to all be winners. But Bobby Kennedy was more of he was small and he was slight and he was somewhat sickly and he had a big heart, and his mother knew that, Rose Kennedy, and she played to that big heart all the time that his father was pushing him to win, which he tried to do in the beginning. And then after his brother was killed, he disappeared for a little bit. He came back. He ran for senator in New York, And he thought, I can do better. We can do better as a country. So for me, starting this story off, trying for so long to figure out how to begin this story and how to structure it for young people, I hit upon William Faulkner's Beginning to the Reivers. It's a book I read every year, and picked it up to read it. And I was struggling so much with Bobby, and I read Grandfather Said, and that's it. And then the story begins. It's a frame. And I thought, of course, I'm a grandmother myself now, and I want to tell this story. And so that's how I began. Grandfather Said. And then there's a little boy and his grandfather, and they're walking along railroad tracks. You don't know where they're going. You just know that there's a journey they're taking together, walking and holding hands. And he begins by saying, back in the days. Let me see if I can, because I'll be better at it if I read it and don't just try to remember it. But back in the days when people worked with their hands, in the days before spaceships and televisions and computers, Robert Francis Kennedy was born. And then when you turn the page, we're trying to connect with young people. All his life, he loved ice cream and big dogs, just like you do. There's a lot in this story that's darker. I mean, we have 3 assassinations, Martin Luther King Jr., John Kennedy, and Bobby. And we have a war, the war in Vietnam. But we also have the lightness of who he was and the change that he was and how he inspired so many young people, including me, to get ready to change the world. So that's a little bit about Bobby. I know we were going to just have a conversation, Andrea, and talk about the connections and comparisons of our books, and so a companionship of our books. And so for me, it was like, when I read your book, when I picked it up the first time, I was so struck by the fact that here's a young person who is already on fire for change because he's learned in school, which is great, right, about John Lewis, and probably from his family too.
Yeah.
But was inspired, just like I was inspired as a young person, to make change and to do things differently than they had been done. And you follow his story through, and in Bobby, we follow this young child through. We follow this child with his grandfather telling him the story.
Right. I mean, I think what I love about the books is that we both, unbeknownst to us before talking about them, or, before meeting each other about the books, took this kind of cross-generational approach.
Yes.
Which, grandfather said, and in the case of Tybre, his grandmothers, loading him up in the car because they had an aspiration for their grandson. So it's the elders knowing that, hey, little ones, you're it, we're instilling this in you. And, in the case of Because of You, John Lewis, what I think is interesting, Deborah, is that, as you pointed out, so many of these civil rights stories do overlap. John Lewis, when he was a kid, wanted to meet his hero, Martin Luther King Jr. He wrote Martin Luther King Jr. a letter and got to meet his hero. And with, the way the book is structured is that we see young John wanting to meet somebody he aspires to be like, and then we see Tybre, and then the stories come together. But all the while, both with Bobby and Because of You, John Lewis, it's an elder reaching out a hand to a younger person and saying, come on this journey. And then I almost feel like the elders get them on the journey and then step back, and now it's time for the young people to take it forward.
I see that in both those books, and it was exciting. I got spine tingles thinking, we need to talk together. We need to know about these books together and share them with people. There's another interesting connection between John Lewis and Bobby Kennedy. And this was a piece I wanted to include in the book and was trying my best to figure out, and finally did include. But I didn't name John Lewis particularly, but I want you to know that when Bobby Kennedy ran for president in 1968, he came late to the race, and he was out there, traveling and making speeches, and was making a stop in Indianapolis. And as he was getting ready to land in Indianapolis, this was April 4th, 1968, news came that Martin Luther King Jr. had just been assassinated. how is he going to land here and make this speech to people who've been waiting for hours without cell phones, without access to the 24-hour news cycle like we have? They're going to hear it from him. And his aides said, don't, you can't. You're speaking to this crowd that's a mostly Black crowd, actually, and they have in this particular area, this particular neighborhood, and they're going to be angry, they're going to be upset, they're going to be, there's probably going to be looting across the country tonight. And he didn't know what to do. And so he called John Lewis, his friend John Lewis, and he said, I don't know what to do. The cities are beginning to burn. He's been killed by a white man. I'm a white man. I'm coming here. And John Lewis, I have it in front of me here to read you so I get it right. John Lewis said, come. These are your people. They have been waiting for hours, and you need to talk to them. And he did. And he spoke extemporaneously from his heart about what we need in the United States is not violence and not hatred, but love for one another. And Indianapolis was quiet that night, not because of Bobby, but because there had been someone who came and spoke to them. They had heard some message and they had decided on their own that they were going to make a difference. So I just feel that's a lovely connection as well that the books have together, and they're not even spoken about in either book.
Right. And you remind me too about just the importance of a read aloud, sitting with a child, what the power of a picture book can do. I call so many of these social justice books, and all books, jewels and tools. It's a tool for parents, teachers, booksellers, librarians, anybody who is in service to children or knows a child or was a child, will learn by sitting down and doing a read aloud, and having both books just open conversations. Let's talk about that night. Let's talk about that walk across the bridge. Let's talk about, in the case of John Lewis, what is good trouble, and what does that idea mean? When you see something that's not so okie dokie, stand up, say something, speak up. How do we do that today with everything going on? And I think what's so relevant too about Bobby, and because of you, John Lewis, is that while these events were taking place, for kids, it's ancient history, but in the 60s and before, so much of it is relevant. The same conversations are happening today in schools and communities and need to happen, and the same actionable inspiration still needs to be going on, and is, and again, young people are moving it forward.
And I know that with your body of work, that's one of your concerns, as it is mine, is how do we keep alive stories that are relevant to today, and they can be enjoyed today, and they can also be useful today and meaningful today. And I want to talk a little bit about voice, since you talked about read alouds. I don't know if you have your book there or even would want to read a little bit, but the voice in this book is so fantastic. I wouldn't want to pick for you, but I love how you've got it's Bobby's older in voice, and this book, of course, about a young person, has that cadence and occasional poetry. It's all poetry, but it has occasional deliberate poetry right in the middle of the page. It's almost like call and response, is it? I don't know, but I just loved it. I loved it. Is there anything that, I could pick my own, but I just know that there are places in here that, even from the very beginning, he wakes with a dream that said, I should not read your words. You know how to do them so much better.
Well, you actually reminded me of something, which is the importance of the oral tradition, and how relevant that is to, as you said, passing on these stories, sitting down and telling them, telling these stories to a young person and keeping the stories alive. And one of my kind of most, I don't know, my favorite, one of the sections that really just kind of always makes me think about the importance of young people rising and standing up is the end. It was the thing that ignited the inspiration to write the book, which was seeing Tybre read and talk about his hero. So I'll read a little bit of that, which is at the end of the book.
Oh, please.
This is when he's, at the funeral, and it says, when heaven's cloak called John Lewis home, when the world said goodbye to the crusader named Good Trouble, Tybre Faw stepped up, stood tall, spoke about courage, spoke about strength, spoke about the determination of moving past doubt. Tybre from Tennessee, he knew. Because of you, John Lewis, we shall not be moved. Because of you, John, we can all look to the sky. You've given every child permission to fly. Do you see it up there? The wide, wide blue? Because of you and you and you, we will lace new shoes, cross big bridges, wake up, wish, and march toward a brighter tomorrow. And that's the hope, that kids will wake up, wish, and march toward a brighter tomorrow. So.
And I love that voice, that oral tradition voice, juxtaposed. Let's just juxtapose it for a moment, because you said the end and I went right there with you. And grandfather said, comes back at the end of Bobby, look around you. We have come here together in peace, in respect, and with common purpose. We know we have work to do. These can be the days of hope and togetherness. It will take many hands reaching out, just like yours. It will take tough, fierce, mighty hearts, just like yours. So ask questions, listen, learn, grow. Get ready to change the world. We're saying almost the same thing in a way, two different voices, two different cultures, two different ways of looking at how to navigate the world. It's very exciting to me.
Right. And the ideas are so timeless. Hands, hearts, feet moving forward. All that. And right. Hand and heart and feet. They never go out of style. They're not.
That's right.
We all have them. We all need them. We need them to make these changes happen.
And aren't we lucky that we have booksellers who have these books on their shelves, who can hand sell them to the people who come in and say these very things that you and I are saying, and when we can't be there, and have that knowledge, that deep, deep, deep knowledge of canon, and can be able to say, and these for civil rights, and these for family, and these for community, and these for friendship, which is, these books are, they cover all those places and more. And risk and courage and heart, like you just said. Let's talk about the heart.
Yes,
you go first.
Yeah. So again, it's the power of the picture book. I believe that. I know that the pictures tell their own story. I always say that those kids that maybe they're not going to read the whole book. But those images will invite them to quote unquote read. It's visual literacy. And in the case of Because of You, John Lewis, the artist is Keith Henry Brown. And you may know of Keith Henry Brown and not know you know him. His work is often in the New York Times. He is the creative director of New York City's Jazz at Lincoln Center. And he brings such a penultimate spiritual quality to the illustrations in what I was trying to achieve or sought to achieve with the writing, just that, this is something to lift us up and take us to a higher place. And again, it invites conversation. There's an opening spread where I think you read it, Deborah, where we first meet Tybre and he's kind of gazing out a window. And what Keith has done so brilliantly is you can, if you look at it, there's like a tiny little shooting star among the galaxy there. And it's so symbolic of, Tybre's trajectory. This young kid is this star in a galaxy of social justice and equality. And again, when I saw the art, I was just,
Isn't that's why when you say they spark conversations, that's why we need actually teachers and librarians and people who can know these things and help point them out to young readers or old readers like me who miss that, but loves that. I love knowing that. Wow. And I will tell you a little bit about Bobby's art. I was totally blown away when I got this art. we looked for a long time for just the right illustrator for Bobby. And Tatiana Fazlalizadeh, who is an Iranian-American Black woman, artist in her own right, does murals, Stop Telling Women to Smile, is an activist as well. I'm so grateful to her for taking this story, my words, and some of Bobby's words, and elevating them with her art, just elevating the text. And, that's what a writer who's not an artist always hopes for. You always hope that someone is going to come along with those words and say, I see this, I see this. And she does. She's an amazement. And I don't have a particular place to show you, but they're wonderful. And let me see. Oh, this is from a Herb Block cartoon that she took and adapted for when Bobby was running for president. And all the hands that reach out to him when he reaches his hand out and says, let us work together, basically. But the visualness of that says much, much more than a whole lot of words can say. So I'm grateful about that. It's a really good thing.
Right. It's something young people can do. So much of the civil rights movement then and now was really about, arms and aims, and I almost feel like if our books had arms, they'd be linked, they'd be together, they'd be, on the path.
They would. And they also stand beautifully separately. And that's a good thing. I mean, isn't that the definition? You would know better than I. The definition of picture books is like, I've heard this many times, that you have the art can stand alone, the words can stand alone, and together they make something totally different. Is that the way you heard it, or that you work with it? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it makes a third entity. It's that perfect marriage. And I don't know about you, but we authors frequently have very little, or kind of like, we're not standing over the artist's shoulder. We don't hang out at Starbucks while they paint. As much as I adore Keith Henry Brown, and I live in Brooklyn, New York, and so does he, I didn't knock on the door and say, how's it going? I didn't invite him. Maybe I will this year. I was gonna say, I didn't invite him for Thanksgiving and say, hey, can you show me some sketches? So I never, you don't know until you see it. And then when I saw it, it was just terrific for the reasons that you talk about. I mean, one case in point is that there's reference made to Bloody Sunday. So, what he has done is, again, that's Bloody Sunday. That's smattering of pain. And we don't need to see the gruesome aspects of it. It's.
Oh, that was so well done. I knew exactly what that was when I saw it, and I said, oh, well done. Mm-hmm. Well done. For young people, it says it all. It says everything you need to know. Mm-hmm. I also want to talk just for a moment about my editor, Pingeist, who took this book and stayed with me for years to get it right, for years. And it takes a village, as you well know. And you talked about Diane calling you and being so excited about this new idea that has now turned into a book. Ken and I, and David Saylor, the art director too, for this book, I mean, we all worked so hard. We all worked so hard together. It's hard to see when you hold a book in your hands, the work that's gone on behind the scenes to make that book come together. And of course, there are many other people too, but I just want to say that I'm very grateful to have been in very good hands to put this book together with someone who was able to help me be the best I could be with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I always say there should be a reality TV show about what goes on behind the scenes to make any book, really. People would know, actually. They would not believe it. I mean, for example, a book cover, what's on the cover? What color is the type? What is the typeface of the cover? What's the font? Do we have a serif? Do we have a non-serif? Should it be red? Should it be blue? Should it be big? Should it be small? Should there be a subtitle? All of that happens. And, in my case, the art director is Marika Kostu, who's just a maestro. And I have in the back of Because of You, John Lewis, let's see, up to 6 pages of what we call back matter. So there's a timeline.
Oh, I know. I noticed that.
And it's almost like a
photographs. Yes,
great resource. And
it
I have
is.
to say, I'm not an art director, I'm not a designer, but I do know it is very hard to get all of that in and to design it and make it readable. And it's
inviting
full of information.
It's inviting. It really is. And it's like you said, a book within a book that offers, they used to call that added value, that offers a way for whatever the terminology is, doesn't matter, but kids will care, and teachers will care, librarians will care, and booksellers will care. All of our gatekeepers, parents will care, because the business that we're in requires us to go through gatekeepers to reach those young children and to reach those young readers, which I'm very happy to have as partners. I don't even like the word gatekeeper. I like the word partner.
Yeah.
I like to be partnering. Do you have a minute? I mean, I don't know where we are, Susan, on time, but I would love to know what you're working on next, if you're able to say, or what's in your creative mind coming up, or
what's in the queue. So I've had the pleasure of working on the Chelsea Clinton She Persisted reader series. And so, which is just great. It's a nonfiction series about notable women that many of you may be familiar with, the She Persisted picture books that Chelsea has done. So this is a reader series, and I wrote one that kicked off the series a year ago, and that was on Harriet Tubman, and then the new one I have coming out is on Ella Fitzgerald. So and like all of these books, Deborah, I will say, and I know that you can relate to this, we research things down to the toenail. The research that goes into it, not only our individual research, but then all of the, the scholars that are called in, so that every T is crossed, I is dotted, and all that information is absolutely.
I actually love that. I would research beyond writing if I were allowed to sometimes, because I find it fascinating, but I bet you did, and Ella, I'm going to tell Jim about this. My husband is a jazz man and a 30-year, maybe 40 by now, professional musician. And also have to tell him about Keith, because I want him to know that he's got somebody in his house on the front of this book who's with jazz at Lincoln Center. Anyway, there's a lot of research. You're correct. So much research. You don't think about
and what are you doing, Deborah? What's new and exciting? And
as you know, since we're both at Scholastic, I am writing this book. I hope. No, I am. I finally found a way in. It only took me like 2.5 years to find a way into this novel about the lost cause of the Confederacy, and then the rise of white supremacy. And the name of it is Charlottesville. And we're going through what happened in Charlottesville. I have my characters. I'm thinking things like metafiction now and postmodernism, and it's really a wild, wild ride. But I'm finally enjoying it. I'm fine. I mean, I've researched like we were just talking, like, so high. But that's what I'm working on now. It used to be demoralizing, but now I'm in it. I'm in it. You know how that works too? You're like, I don't know how I'm ever going to do this, and then suddenly it's like, let's go. Let's go. I love that. I love that feeling, and boy, do we have to work for it.
Right. I love these.
So
it only took you 2.5 years. I always get that question in schools. How long does it take you to write a book? And I'll say to fourth graders or whatever, well, a picture book, can take up to a year. I often have to revise the manuscript up to 10 times. What I send to my editor is like a pre-first draft and all that. So wow, 2.5 years to get to start writing. Wonderful. That's terrific. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Hey, I'm sneaking back on. We have questions.
All right.
So
okay.
So and these are people gave detail with their questions. So Elizabeth Ferrari says, I love that both of these books contain stories within stories. Bobby opening with the grandfather telling the grandson the story of RFK's life, and John Lewis with Tybre Faw. What made you both decide to tell your subjects' stories in such a multi-layered way?
Oh, that's a great question.
I've actually answered that a little bit just by saying that I struggled so long to figure out a frame or a structure for the book. And when I did my yearly rereading of the Reivers and saw Grandfather Said, I thought, of course, I've been trying to be in that space, but I'm not really, kids aren't there, but they will be with their grandfathers, maybe hearing this story or some story. And that's how the frame, a book will tell itself. It'll tell you how it wants to be. Do you find that, Andrea? I see you nodding.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in my case, right, that the actual story itself kind of informed the writing and the format. You made reference, Deb, to the fact that it's written in verse, and that's just how it came. And again, the parallel stories, once we dug into that research, John Lewis really essentially had the same path as young Tybre, wanting to meet his heroes. So that informed, and again, we work very hard at our writing, and but I do feel like sometimes I was just kind of typing and being a channel for what we all saw on the page.
That's a gift when that comes. And I guess that's what I was trying to say about Charlottesville. That's what I'm feeling like now. I'm just capturing it. I feel that way about Kent State too. You're in a space where you're holding it. You're trying to gather it before it escapes from you. And that's rare for me anyway, very rare. But when that happens, you're just like, you've been given a gift and you just say, okay, whatever you say, let's go.
Right. Let's do this.
So Karen Leggett wanted to know, how do you decide whether you are the right person to write about a particular person or subject? It may be compelling, but it's yours to tell. I told you they were tough questions.
Karen. Karen is a Children's Book Guild of DC member, just as I am. And we go way back, as do you, Andrea, to DC, growing up in DC. Yeah. I don't know how to answer that. You go first. I'll think on it.
Okay. Well, I'll just say, I was just talking to somebody about this earlier today. So my background is as a journalist and magazine editor. And I wrote for the Times and just a lot of publications. Anyway, I bring it up to say that training has really helped me, because when you're creating a magazine or a newspaper, you have to be thinking of ideas constantly. So that's just kind of how my brain is wired, that I'm thinking of ideas constantly. And I have many ideas that I say, I like this idea, but I'm not the one to do it. I don't have the, I don't have the chops, or, I'm not the right person to do it, but I can have an idea and then I can call a writer or hold on to the idea. But you kind of just know. I mean, I know for me, like when Diane Hess contacted me about this, I was like, oh my God, this is like, I love, like, I'm so into this, and you just know it. So
that speaks to maybe what I can say about this, which is that when there's a feeling that comes to you that you can't not write it. You have to write it. You have to, at least, even if it never sells anywhere, you have to investigate it. You have to research it. You have to make it yours on some level, and you have to tell it. You have to tell it, write it, sing it, dance it, paint it, draw it, whatever it is. But that story has chosen you almost. I mean, I've had stories that I put aside that I feel like they're not working and I don't know why. This was one of them, actually. For a long time, I put it aside. And one other thing I'll say is that I write from my perspective. I'm always saying I write for 10-year-old me, or 12-year-old, or 14-year-old, depending on the book that I'm writing. And 14-year-old me is a white girl. And so I use my particular way of seeing, but try to bring in other voices at the same time and other ways of seeing. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, then I set it aside for a while, which is what I did with Bobby for a long time, and with some other books too. But eventually they either tell you, yeah, you're it, or you're not.
Yeah.
So you actually walked right into the next question, which is Joyce Ray said, both of you write out of your cultures and then experiences about people who've made contributions for change and who are connected in wonderful ways.
Right.
How do you feel about authors writing out of their cultures to highlight social activists? Under what circumstances might this be possible?
I don't think you can write a story that has heft and depth and heart and emotion without looking at the world. And for instance, when I wrote Revolution, which takes place in 1964 Mississippi. And by the way, hey Joyce, thank you for coming. When I wrote Revolution, my main character, Sunny, is a 12-year-old white girl living in a southern Mississippi town in the Delta. But I couldn't, this is another book I struggled with for a long time. And until I came across Ray, who was a Black kid who lived literally across the tracks in Baptist-town, the story it went nowhere. And then one day, here came Ray talking to me, and I started to give Ray chapters, and I sent those chapters, everything I had, to David Levithan, who's my editor for novels. And David, the first thing he said was, okay, that's it, keep going. Because finally we had texture and meaning and something to bounce off of. And Ray is not the main character. Sunny is. And she has her whole family that all make, entrances and have their own backstories. But Ray has one too. I'm not sure. I always write from this perspective of 10-year-old me, 12, 14-year-old me. So what do you say about that, Andrea? You probably have a lot more nuance to this than I do.
Well, same, I write for 10-year-old Black me. As you referenced, Deborah, I was born in Washington, D.C., the child of civil rights foot soldiers. So I just think that's really literally in my DNA. But I wrote a novel called The Red Pencil that is set in the year 2004 in Sudan and Darfur during the Civil War. So I was, even though I've traveled widely in Africa, and that's kind of, one of the inspirations behind the book. I'm not African, I'm African American. And so I really dove into that pool as deeply as I could. And I felt that, when I was in Africa, I, spent a lot of times in schools and spoken to people. So, and I'll be honest, I felt out of my comfort zone at certain times. And I felt, a little nervous when it was published, and, thankfully it was, well received. But, and that was a book that I, interestingly enough, felt really compelled to write. I really felt compelled to write it. And I felt that Amira, the main character, like she wrote it. I think it was the experience of writing it I truly was the typist. And I felt like she wrote it. And again, it was a lot of people from Darfur and Sudan read it. And I sat with a gentleman who I referenced in the back of the book, and we literally sat together, and looked at every word. Every word we went through.
Having readers, expert readers, sensitivity readers, whatever they may be, scholars, academics, whatever, is useful. It's necessary, and I think it's really important. But I also think that this is not an easy question that's like got a black and white, but it's got a simple answer. It's just like, it depends on the story and who you are and what's calling to you and how that works.
So thank you. So we have one last question, and it's actually for you, Deborah. Deborah Hopkinson asks, Deborah, I know you've written novels for older readers about the 1960s. Do you see yourself creating more picture books to reach a younger audience?
Say that again.
Sorry, that you've written several novels for older readers about in the 60s. Do you see yourself creating more picture books for a younger audience?
In the 60s or just picture books? I don't know. Deborah,
well, I think just picture books.
That's a hard question. I hope so. I love picture books. Picture books are hard. I think picture books are much harder than novels. I can, spread out with the novel. But when you're writing a picture book, every word, like you just said, Andrea, every word counts too. And you have to make your decisions and tear your hair out a lot more, to me. I mean, I feel like, Yes, I hope I write more picture books. Thank you for that question, Deborah. What about you, Andrea? Picture books?
Well, I just want to say the fact that if that's the Deborah Hopkinson, who I think it is, asking
I
that,
think it is.
you know, that like, wow, like, hi, Deborah Hopkinson, and okay, I won't fangirl on the call now, but anyway, yeah, and I think the story often dictates for me the format or the genre. You know, and I'll go to my editor and say, well, here's a kernel of something, like, how do you think I should do it? Like, and that's a creative conversation. Or you start to write it, you're like, this is not working. This is not working. This, this is not a picture book. Or, you know, we don't need all this space. This is a picture book. So
Oh, that's neat. I bet you work with writers like that too, and
yeah,
people to discuss with them as well. And by the way, just to say that Deborah Hopkinson writes fantastic, beautiful, powerful, meaningful picture books. All her books are certainly worth checking out.
yeah.
Going to Politics and Prose and buying and and sharing widely. Yeah, she's. I think of her as an expert at picture books. I'm a journeyman, totally.
So,
But I love it.
sorry. So I want to say, I'm sorry. Okay.
We're good.
We're good. Sorry. So thank you all for joining us and for all of your wonderful questions. And thank you again to Deborah Wiles and Andrea Davis Pinkney for today's really interesting presentation. We all learned so much. Don't forget, you can still click the link in the chat box to get your own copy of Because of You, John Lewis, or Bobby, A Story of Bobby Kennedy. We have many copies waiting for you. As an independent bookstore, we appreciate your support. Also, be sure to check our website for updated events listings, and you can follow our Children and Teens Department on social media under @Kids and Prose.